So you love the Universal monsters, but you just don't have the time to sit down and watch the Horror Movie Syllabus video on classic monsters. Well, this Cliff Notes doctorate version video is probably just what the mad scientist ordered. It's alive! Alive! Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of how the syllabus works. In essence, we do a particular subgenre of horror and then pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But in this video, we're doing a little bit of a Cliff's Notes version of that. We talked about the subgenre of classic monsters previously on the Horror Movie Syllabus. And this video is going to give a quick recap of the movies we talked about in that video for those of you that want something a little bit more bite-sized, a little more of an overview of the syllabus's subgenre, if you will. But then for those of you that have been around for a while and want something new, we're going to add a 4th doctorate level selection to the subgenre. A 4th movie to pick that is a little bit more of an obscure movie, or a little bit more deep cut, something a little bit more unlikely for you to have seen, or maybe at least a little bit less mainstream, if you will. So with that, let's just jump right into the recap of our previous Classic Monsters video. Our classic monster video focused on the Universal monsters, the classic monsters from the 30s and 40s by Universal Studios that kind of ushered in horror, if you will. The Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman movies, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Invisible Man, things like that. We talked about those quite a bit, but as you know, in the Horror Movie Syllabus, we talk about modern horror films. So we weren't talking about those movies from the 30s and 40s. We were talking about modern interpretations of them. The first movie we talked about, the undergraduate level selection, was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And that's a movie directed by Kenneth Branagh. And we talked a little bit about how the movie is a little truer to the book than most of the adaptations of Frankenstein, in particular the Universal adaptations of Frankenstein, which focused on Frankenstein's monster as just a lumbering monster. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein focused more on the novel aspect of the monster, who was quite intelligent and articulate, and also spent a lot of time talking about how Kenneth Branagh's ego as a director kind of influenced the way that the movie portrayed Victor Frankenstein, the true villain of the story. We ultimately decided it was a pretty good take on the source material and a really beautifully made movie, even though it had some flaws, but overall, one of the better tellings of the Frankenstein mythos. The second movie we talked about, the graduate level selection, is The Wolfman. And we're talking about the Benicio del Toro version of the movie, not the Universal Monster versions. But the Benicio del Toro version is an underrated movie, and we talked about how beautifully shot it is, how well acted it is, and how an unfortunate use of poor CGI really undercuts the value of that movie by just really making it look cheesier at the end than it should have looked, and unfortunately undoing a lot of the goodwill that the really great atmosphere and set design did to make that movie have the same feel as the classic Universal movies did. It's an unfortunate misstep for that movie that, again, undercuts great performances, great casting, a solid script, and really, really great atmosphere. At the end of the day, so many people just focus on the bad CGI that I think they lost the fact that the movie itself was quite good. And as a result, it winds up being a little bit of an underrated gem that very few people seem to appreciate as much as I do. But that's what we spent a lot of time talking about in the video. The third movie we talked about was the postgraduate selection, and it was Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula is an absolute modern classic. I love that movie. And it's a movie that has aged rather well in terms of popularity. At the time it came out, it was a little controversial because it was a very different version of Dracula from the classic Universal Monsters version. And it was something that people were not really prepared for. Very romantic in a different way. Very rounded, well-rounded, and deep character portrayed by Gary Oldman in a way we had never seen Dracula before. We spent a lot of time talking about how beautiful the film was made, how gorgeous it looks with Francis Ford Coppola's direction, the art design, and again the performances of all the actors being great except for Keanu Reeves. We spent some time talking about Keanu Reeves, so he's a miscast part of that movie that has become something of a cultural joke, kind of a funny thing to point at about that movie, but it doesn't do enough to drag it down. It's still a wonderful movie and really sets the tone for the modern day interpretation of Dracula. So that's our quick recap of the movies we talked about in the Classic Monsters video that we did previously. If you'd like a little bit more in-depth discussion about those movies, or if you'd like to hear a little bit more about what we said about Keanu Reeves, I'd recommend you go check out that video in full when you have the time. But for now, let's go ahead and get to the doctorate level selection for Classic Monsters. Our doctorate level selection is House of the Wolfman. And House of the Wolfman came out in 2009 and is a little seen and not very well known movie that is based on the Universal monsters and quite literally is an homage to those movies. If you're not familiar with it, the story is pretty basic. A mad scientist invites a group of people to his mansion or his castle, and in order to determine who's going to be his heir, who's going to inherit his estate. And he's going to test them by a series of challenges. And if they get eliminated, they get eliminated. And of course, we won't spoil the movie for you, but the movie is remarkable largely for its slavish devotion to the Universal monster movies of the 1930s and 40s. It's shot in full frame, in black and white, using a lot of the style and images, settings, and even acting styles of those movies. It's trying very much to be an homage to those movies, and for the most part, doing a really good job of it. It's a large part of where the charm of the movie comes in. It really does do a good job of evoking the sense and sensibility of those Universal monster movies. It has the stereotypical trope characters. It has, again, the look and feel, not just in terms of the black and white and the shooting frame rate and everything, but also in terms of the setting and the storyline. All of it very much evoking 1930s, 1940s Universal horror in a very charming and fun way. The movie even stars Ron Chaney, grandson of Lon Chaney Jr., and of course great grandson of Lon Chaney, as the mad scientist, which is another nice homage, a nice nod to the Universal era of movie making. So it's all really doing a lot of work, doing a lot of effort to pay homage and respect and evoke those old classic movies. So why isn't it more well known? Why isn't it more popular and why didn't it make more of a splash? I think, in a nutshell, it's because of the acting. I think that the script is fine. Again, not the deepest of scripts, and it really does kind of evoke some of the more average movies in the Universal catalog. But the acting is not great for many of the characters. Some of them are okay. There's two or three that I think are pretty good, but several of them are bad. And I think it's because they're trying to be like the old classic acting of the 30s and 40s, but they're failing miserably. The acting in those classic movies is far superior to a lot of what you're seeing in these movies. And it's unfortunate because it really, really hampers the movie. Even Ron Chaney, not great. He's very flat in the movie, and it's unfortunate because he needs to be big. He needs to be grandiose and over the top, and he's not really doing it. There's a couple other characters that are a little uneven as well. Lon Chaney probably being the biggest fly in the ointment, but several of them just not selling it, not as big as they should be. It almost felt like they had non-actors in there, and I didn't do enough research to really find out if that was the case, but disappointing that they didn't have better acting in there, because with better acting, with people hamming it up, with people really selling that 1930s style patter, this movie would have been excellent. As it is, I found it an enjoyable attempt. You know, I have a place in my heart for movies that swing for the fences, even if they miss. This movie misses, but it's a great attempt. It's a really great idea that I wish somebody else would do better. You know, an idea of taking these Universal monsters, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, putting them all in one movie in that Universal movies, monster movie style was a great idea. The execution was a little poor. And not even a lot poor, just a little poor, but just enough to make it miss the mark. So I really wish somebody would do a remake of this one or just a different movie with the same premise or same idea and do it better. This would be a great win if it would be just a little bit better acting. That's all we needed for that one. But that said, have you seen this movie? Do you think that the acting is bad? Do you think this is a movie warranted mentioning here? I'm betting a lot of you haven't seen the movie or maybe not even heard of it. If you haven't, It's worth checking out. Again, it's not manage your expectations, especially about the acting, but definitely check it out because the idea is that good. So that's our deep cut pick for the doctorate level selection for classic monsters. But I've got an extra credit movie for you too because I just couldn't pick one. The extra credit movie I'm going with is Dan Curtis's Dracula. And Dan Curtis's Dracula came out in 1974 and it was a made for TV movie that is actually surprisingly really good. It is the story of Dracula, and it's really pretty true to the Bram Stoker novel. So if you're familiar with the Bram Stoker novel, you know the story of this movie. It's fairly true to it. It's also kind of true to the Bram Stoker's Dracula that we just mentioned a little while ago, the Francis Ford Coppola version, only it's a little bit more traditional in terms of how Dracula looks and in terms of how the acting goes and the story goes. The movie was made by Dan Curtis, who is known for creating Dark Shadows, and I love Dark Shadows. Part of why I like this movie so much, and it was written by Richard Matheson, famous for I Am Legend, and it stars Jack Palance or Jack Palance, depending on who you talk to, as Dracula, who a lot of us, who know him from like City Slickers and things like that, really don't understand that he played a villain quite a bit. And he's wonderful in this. The movie is very melodramatic. If you like Dark Shadows, you're probably going to dig this too because it's a similar vibe. It's not too gory because, again, it's made for TV. And it has the melodrama, but the melodrama really works for the way this movie is made. It's very fitting. It fits the Dracula storyline, honestly. That melodrama is really perfect for us. And that's a big part of what I like about it. Again, it's got that Dark Shadows feel, maybe a little bit better production values than Dark Shadows, frankly. And Jack Palance is chewing up scenery and he's great in it. Actually, all the actors are really good in this. If you'd taken the actors from this and put it in House of the Wolfman, House of the Wolfman would have been a fantastic movie. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but they are good here. And so if you can get behind that, then you can enjoy this. In particular, enjoy Jack Palance because he is really wonderful in this. In fact, side note, in my research, I found out that the Tomb of Dracula comic book, the character of Dracula in there, the design of Dracula in that comic book was based on Jack Palance. Even though he hadn't made this movie yet, they just thought he would be a good-looking Dracula, and they were right. So that's just a fun little side note for it. But this is a movie that is not super hard to track down. You should be able to find it fairly easily. I think it's on streaming in different places, but it's definitely worth your time. If you like Dracula, if you like melodrama, if you like kind of gothic horror, gothic romantic horror, definitely check this one out. It's going to be up your alley. So that's going to do it for our Cliff Notes version of the Classic Monsters. Again, if you want more, check out our full-length video that we've done previously on Classic Monsters. It's definitely worth a watch. We go into these movies in a lot more detail. And now it's time to do the horror trivia question. We like to do this at the end of every video where we take a horror trivia pursuit card and answer a question from it live on camera. And we're going to do that right now. I'll give you a few seconds to answer two. I'm looking at the monster category on the horror trivia pursuit question. And the question is, who directed 2008's Cloverfield? Now, what's amusing about this is that in the video that I just recorded that you guys saw last week, we talked about 10 Cloverfield Lane, and we talked about the Cloverfield franchise a little bit. So this is a little bit fresh in my mind, but what's funny about this is that, and I'm kind of killing time so you guys can answer on your own. I know the answer to this question. I do. And what's fun about this is that the person that is usually thought of as the director of this movie is not the person who directed it at all. Most people, and if you're answering this right now, you're wrong. Most people will say J.J. Abrams directed this movie. He did not. He is the producer of it, and his name was all over it because he was the bee's knees at the time. But he did not actually direct this movie. The person who directed this movie is Matt Reeves, and I'm going to double check myself. Yep, Matt Reeves is who directed this movie. And Matt Reeves, at the time, I think this was his first movie, was directing Cloverfield. And he did a really good job. Cloverfield's a good movie. He's probably going to be super famous very soon because he's directing the new Batman movie. But for those of you that really like the new Planet of the Apes movies, he directed a few of those, and they're excellent. And he's a great director. So Matt Reeves, I'm expecting more and more great things from him from the Batman and then going forward. But Cloverfield was where he got his start. That is the answer to the question. Did you guys get it right? Answer in the comments below if you got it right. And if you didn't, did you guess J.J. Abrams? Be honest. Tell us if you answered J.J. Abrams so we can make fun of you. We won't really make fun of you. I'm just kidding. But hopefully you guys got the question right. Hopefully you enjoyed this brief Cliff Notes version of the video. Let me know what you think of it. Let me know what your doctorate level selection is for the classic monsters. And until next week, class dismissed.